So we've got four contributors today, and I will very briefly introduce them. Most of them joining us from Europe, but we've got Meiro Koizumi from Yokohama. So, um, first of all, Jill Webber. She is currently director of Chelsea Heritage Quarter, a trustee of the National Holocaust Museum, and a member of the Arts and Humanities Research Council Advisory Board. And she also spent 9 years at the Imperial War Museums, where she was tackling precisely this issue of how to remember war and how to reach out beyond the traditional visitors that museum has. So next one is Meiro Koizumi, who lives and works in Yokohama, and I had the pleasure of visiting his studio a couple of weeks ago. He uses a lot of technology in his work, and in particular, I think we might be talking today about his work, Angels of Testimony, which is about memories of the Second World War. And he's won a couple of prizes down the bottom of this page, the grand prize in the 24th Art Division of the Japan Media Arts Festival, and also the Artes Mundi prize here in the UK. Then the next speaker is Sayuri Kose, who is a journalist and writer based in the Netherlands. Her grandfather experienced the atomic bombing in Nagasaki, and she worked for 6 years, as you can see, for the Nagasaki Shimbun, the newspaper in Nagasaki, covering issues related to the atomic bomb, peace, and US military bases, all of which are big issues in that area of Japan. And she also covered the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in 2024, in which the prize was awarded to Japanese groups campaigning against nuclear weapons. And the whole thing is going to be moderated by Jonathan Watkins, an old friend of the Daiwa Foundation. He was director of Icon Gallery in Birmingham for the best part of 25 years. And before that, he was curator at the Serpentine Gallery and director at Chisenhale Gallery. And he has a long record of curating exhibitions all over the world. So it's great to have Jonathan back with us today. And I think there's the timeline. So I'm basically going to hand over to Jonathan, who will moderate a conversation between the various speakers for 45 minutes, and then we'll go to audience Q&A. So over to you, Jonathan.
Great, Jason. Thanks very much. And well, how nice to be here in such good company and to talk about something that is of particular interest to me, as well, being the son of somebody who fought in the Second World War. And interesting for members of the panel to know that my father actually fought the Japanese in Burma in the 1940s. Also, like Jill, I have a connection with the Imperial War Museum. I mean, I was a trustee there, sort of running up until the 1418 now program that is concerned with the centenary of the First World War. And Jill, I thought I'd start with you because you've been working with the Imperial War Museum for a number of years, and this is an institution which is concerned with memories of war and communicating memories of war. And I wondered if you could share with us some general observations that you'd make on the subject.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I spent most of my time at IWM. I was there for 9 years as the executive director of programming. Obviously, dealing with some very challenging and also sensitive subjects. And the challenge was quite often how to tell those stories in a way that was accessible to a contemporary audience. And as you said in your introduction, one of the key things I wanted to do was to broaden that audience. So to get people who maybe didn't already come to the IWM very often, or even people who felt that, war wasn't a subject that they were particularly interested in, sort of how do you reach those people who wouldn't automatically think, yes, it's Saturday, I'll go along to an exhibition at a war museum, or, in other media, sort of read a long article about war. Those are the people that you really want to reach. And so I spent, I think, the entirety of my 9 years at Imperial War Museums, you know, trying out different ways of reaching people like that while still being sensitive, of course, to the subject matter. And so, and we can, maybe expand on this and talk about this in more detail, particularly with my colleagues on the panel. But using sort of different techniques. So, we used theatre, we used broadcast, we used music, we used academic research. There were all of these different ways of reaching an audience and engaging an audience who might not have, in the first instance, thought that they were interested. The other big theme of my approach was to use current affairs. Current affairs is what I'm interested in, and I feel very firmly that you cannot understand the world as it is today and the world that we live in unless you understand your history and understand how we got here. And I think for an awful lot of people, it was the current affairs that was like the way into the subject matter. So, how do we make this story relevant to people's lives today? And using that as the starting point of the way into telling the story was also really key.
Mm. I mean, prior to your experience at the Imperial War Museum, were you was this an interest that you brought to it? I mean, was it your interest in war and memories of war, as some sort of motivation, or was it your interest in museums and this happened to be the subject matter? Or was it a bit of both?
Actually, I'd never worked in a museum before I worked at
Oh, had you
IWM.
not?
So no. So I worked very broadly in the culture sort of and heritage sector. I started off with 10 years at BBC in current affairs and news. So as I say, it was really sort of the contemporary issues that were the way in for me, and also storytelling. I mean, so the whole of my background, I started off working in communications and marketing. And so the whole of my background was storytelling, understanding audiences, and how to reach them. And so, really, when I started work at IWM, it was a challenge. These are difficult stories to tell. These are sensitive stories to tell. They're very sort of multifaceted. So to me, the attraction was the challenge of telling those stories, which I felt were important as well. I've always been very interested in contributing something, I suppose, and enabling difficult stories to tell that matter. Not never been very interested in the fluffy stuff, I have to say. Sort of like more sort of challenging subjects. And so I saw working at Imperial War Museums as a challenge in terms of the subject matter. How do you tell these incredible stories that really matter today and are still so relevant today to a wider audience? That's what attracted me to it.
Yeah, what surprised me too, and sort of defied expectation, was, um, the nature of the institution. When you tell people that you're working with the Imperial War Museum, they assume that you have some sort of obsession with war, and maybe almost in an unhealthy way. But actually, I mean, it's important to stress how the Imperial War Museum, as you were implying earlier, I mean, it's concerned with the past, with an idea of having some effect on the present and the future, and with an idea of the promotion of peace,
Absolutely. Yeah.
rather than
Yeah. I mean,
war,
one of the
paradoxically.
one of the things that always pleased me enormously was challenging people's expectations of the War Museum.
Yes, yeah.
And one of the first exhibitions that I did was on peace, actually. And we unfortunately we weren't able to do this in real life, but we did a digital advertising campaign which sort of crossed out the word war on the front of the building and substituted the word peace. So, and we also put some daisies in those of you who are familiar with the Imperial War Museum in London, there's some very big First World War guns immediately outside it, which are sort of definitive for those who know the museum. And we stuck some daisies in the end of them and did so, got some amazing press coverage. coverage on that. So, you know, all of these things were just to sort of challenge people's expectations as to actually what are the stories that we tell. You know, the stories are actually all about peace in the end. You know, it's not the glorification of war. It's, you know, how do we learn from the past to inform what we're doing today? And sadly, with what's going on in the world today, you know, that couldn't be a more relevant message.
No, and particularly relevant your work in and about the Middle East, I think. You know, I mean, I looking at notes that I have here. I mean, your work, you know, with respect to Syria, for example, and that part of the world, which could not be more pertinent right now. But what about Japan? Did you have any? Did you focus at all on Japan in your work with IWM?
During the First World War centenary period, and then also we marked the end of the Second World War with a campaign which we called Victory 75. So obviously this was back in 2020. And we did tell stories, particularly of the bombing in Nagasaki and Hiroshima as part of that. So one of the things that we did, I mean, it's interesting because, of course, we're talking particularly about silence as part of this webinar and how people didn't speak. And that's, you know, again, something that I could expand on. But actually, as part of the programming that we did for that, we had a piece called Voices of War, which was people talking about their experience of the atomic bomb. Obviously, some of them some years later, but we had a small gallery where people just sat and listened to a loop of stories, authentic stories from people who had first-hand experience, describing what happened and what their memories were and how it had impacted them. It was a very sort of simple lighting within the gallery so people could just focus on what they were hearing. And you could go in at any time, you know, you didn't have to sit there from beginning to end. It was just on a loop and you could go in. And we just got the most incredible feedback from that experience. That's sort of like very immersive and just enabling people to hear from those who were there or in the immediate aftermath as to what had happened to them. The other piece that we did was with the artist Es Devlin. So we commissioned her to do a digital art piece, which was called I Saw the World End, which was featured both on our website, but also on the screens at Piccadilly Circus in London. Again, an incredibly powerful piece. And I think that this is also really important as to sort of how to tell these stories, you know, sort of using art, using music, using performance. You know, these are ways to sort of reach people and also explore, you know, the challenges and the very difficult themes that there are, rather than just sort of a straight narrative. And, you know, particularly when you don't have the voices because people have been silent. I think that, you know, using these different ways to explore the story is really key.
Yes, I mean, it's something that we could sort of talk about more, and then particularly in relation to Myru's work. But also what you've just said is a perfect segue, Sayuri, to asking you a question about first-hand accounts of experiences of war, and in particular, your grandfather. I mean, your family comes from Nagasaki, and I know that you are very concerned to be in conversation with your grandfather to talk about his experience. Can you tell us, you know, how that went? I don't think it was so straightforward.
Yeah. So as you said, my maternal grandfather is Hibakusha. Currently, he is 92 years old, and when he was 12 years old, he was at home around 3 kilometers away. The bomb was dropped. His father is a doctor involved in relief activities, and I heard my grandfather also became involved in relief activities at the Shin because his primary school became one of the relief stations. That was like my grandfather told me very briefly. And also, I learned about the atomic bomb and nuclear weapons in peace classes at school from primary level in Nagasaki. But at the time, I had no sense that I was a third generation Hibakusha. No idea, no, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and then when I became a newspaper reporter in 2016, I started to ask my grandfather about his experience of the bomb. But he refused, saying that he would rather not be a focus of attention. I was really confronted as a journalist who passed on the memory, but he doesn't want to share his story. And still, I don't know his full experiences.
Is that right? Do you think it was because he just simply wanted to put it out of his mind and try to forget, or do you think it was because, I mean, as you say, he didn't want to be, like the hero of some story, the central figure?
Yeah, so first, I think as I mentioned, he also related to relief activities. So my mother told me that he also engaged with like sew a lot of bodies, like friends' bodies or something like people he knows, and also like and then on the ground he burned those bodies also like he so and also so that kind of like hard experiences. So I think that kind of situation he doesn't want to tell, and also even my mother, he didn't also tell my mother. And when I became a newspaper reporter and I asked, and then my mother also joined this conversation because she really don't know.
Yes, I think it's very interesting, and this is something we can touch on later in relation to the silence that's held, or the information that's withheld by those first-hand witnesses. As far as then the subsequent generation is affected by what has traumatized millions, billions of people around the world, and yet they can't understand it because it's not articulated, and if you like, the effect is sort of transmitted but not understood. And so the kind of work that Jill was describing, is sort of vital for us to sort of understand where we are now and how we got here. Your work as a reporter, I know, took you to Sasebo, and that you were there and you were concerned with the air raids on Sasebo. And this is shortly before the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. What was it that prompted you to undertake that research?
Yes, so in Nagasaki, actually, the main broadcast is, of course, focused on the Nagasaki atomic bomb. But I know the air raids is everywhere, and also one of the city is in Sasebo. So I discover and I ask my mother, do you have kind of like idea to the Sasebo air raids? And then my mom said, oh, we have a relevant, the who suffered from that Sasebo air raids. And then I reach out to the document that the book, it's called Hino Umi. It's called like collected all the testimonies about the Sasebo areas. And I found that my relatives, like 6 people dead, killed by Sasebo area. So I reach out to the document and I collect the people who make the document, the book. And then so that's why I really curious how I reached the document like a kind of first-hand story. Yeah, so I really, and then also Sasebo areas also kind of people fade the memories already. Kind of people doesn't talk much about it. So it's really curious this topic also.
Yes, because you wrote an article, I think, or at least one on the subject of the air raids. But did you write about your grandfather? Did you subsequently publish anything, or just
No,
it just
never.
exists as a conversation
Yes,
and your memory?
yes,
Mm. And now you're living in the Netherlands,
yes,
and of course, you know, you shift halfway around the world, and you have literally a different geographical point of view. Uh, is How is that for you? And you know, and are you maintaining your interest in memories of war as you have sort of translated your existence from Japan to the West?
yes. I want to approach this topic from a different angle, so
Hmm.
about the atomic bomb. So currently, I'm researching prisoners of war in Nagasaki during World War II. There were POW camps across Japan, and Nagasaki had two of them, where prisoners come from countries such as the Netherlands and the United Kingdom as well. And during the interview with families of Dutch POWs, they describes the dropping of the atomic bomb as
There we go, done it now.
bomb as an opportunity to free prisoners of war. I had known that people express such views through news or books, but facing it in person, I was at a loss for words. Like I didn't know how to respond. Hearing that directly from them forced me to confront the complexity of memory of war.
And you understand it now from both sides.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of. Still, I don't have any good answer, but I'm researching. Yeah.
I understand. And then, Myro, you know, the experience of those on the other side, of course, as a result of Japanese aggression, is the subject of your work, and in particularly your work, the Angels of Testimony, that was screened in Cardiff, I think, as part of the Artis
Yes.
Mundi
Yep.
prize. And you know, I mean, of course, it has such resonance, you know, in this part of the world. But on the other hand, for a Japanese audience as well, I think, you know, quite a shocking
Yes.
work of art.
Yep.
And it would be interesting, could you, rather than me describing it,
Sure.
could you tell us what the work involved,
What this
and
work is about?
yeah, and then what kind of impact it had?
Yeah, sure. So this work is called The Angel of Testimony, which is made in 2019. And I've been making a lot of bodies of artwork, mostly video installation work relating to the war. And a lot of my work deal with how the trauma of war still exists in the society, and also how these trauma were represented in a society. So it's not about the past, but I'm also very much interested in how we are dealing with this part of history, and also what kind of representation we are giving to this part of history. And we have, and I want to deal with this issue from victim's perspective, but also from the perspective of perpetrator. And the Angel of Testimony is one of the work that I made from the perspective of perpetrators. So Japanese as a perpetrator of the war in China and in Asian country. And this part of the history is extremely difficult to deal with in Japan, because we are very intolerant, the society itself, and people are very intolerant towards this part of history. So in general, people don't want to talk about it, and people don't like people talking about it.
Is it taught in schools?
Yes, briefly,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
But it's super important subject. So I looked for somebody who could still talk about the first-hand experience of Japanese soldier being very cruel in Asian country. And then we found Mr. Kondo. His name is Mr. Kondo. He was 99-year-old war veteran, and he was deployed to China in 1940, and he was there for 4 years. And there, when he was there, he experienced all sorts of things. But when he came back, he didn't talk about his experience. But as he turned to 70-year-old in 1989, he decided to talk about his experience, and which includes, for example, like very cruel testimony. It includes gang raping, for example, of women, which he participated, or includes killing civilians, innocent civilians. So he talked about all these things, and there are 2 books published about him. And we found that he's still alive. So we approached him, but he was very old. We approached his daughter, but he was already 99-year-old, very old. And they were not doing any interview because he was getting too old. But daughter said, if I still want to do the interview, then daughter will lie to the hospital and take him out of the hospital. And she set up an interview for us for 1 hour. So I did an interview according to the book, that his testimony. And then many things he's tried to narrate, but as he speaks, he kind of forgets what he was saying. And also many stories he doesn't remember anymore. So we got this, but towards the end of the interview, he starts to sob, and he begged for forgiveness. But also he said he'll never be forgiven, no matter like 50 years, 100 years, no matter how much he apologized, he will never be forgiven. That's what he says. It's a very moving interview. So I had this interview, and what I did was, next step was, I had 15 young people, young Japanese people, between the age between 16 to 27. And I had this group of young people. I asked them to memorize what's being written in his testimony, word by word. They had a choice to choose story, and they memorized his testimony. And once they memorized it, I asked them to let these words out on the street of Tokyo. So in the video installation, we have his interview video with these young people memorizing his words. So on one screen, he tried to narrate his story, but he's forgetting. We see that. But on the other screens, we see young people memorizing his words and then letting out on the streets of Tokyo. So it's like his words are kind of losing the hosting body. But then this whole project, you feel that we are trying to find a new hosting body for these words to dwell, and also try to find a space in contemporary Japanese society where these words being active again.
These words are shocking, aren't they? I mean, what he says is it's mind-boggling, really. And the other thing, of course, is that the people who are reciting these words are the same age he was when these crimes were committed.
Yes, yes. So that was very important, that young people take these words and somehow try to embody these words. And also there's a question of, is it really possible to do that or not? But so the whole process is just try to find a way to give the new representation of history. I think that was a project.
How was it for the young people?
Yeah, for young people, since the interview, Mr. Kondo's interview was so powerful and so truthful that there's no whether you are in this, whether you have this kind of political view or this kind of political view, it doesn't matter, because the interview is so truthful and it's so powerful that young people kind of understand what this project is about, and they try to take in. And one of the very interesting story is that there's one woman. She's a young woman. She memorized she picked the one that the Mr. Kondo participated in gang raping. So this is one of the most shocking story. But she picked that, and she tried to memorize this story. And as she memorizing the story, she was identifying herself as a victim. So she was like sympathizing to the, of course, the victim, woman victim of the rape, and which is quite natural. But when she was doing that, she said she couldn't go anywhere. It was too sad, too tragic, and there's no escape. But then at one point, her performance or her reciting becomes something different, and we didn't understand what was happening, but it became so powerful. And I asked her what happened, and she said, you know, when she was identifying herself as a victim, she couldn't go anywhere. But once she started to identify herself to the Mr. Kondo, then all of a sudden she felt that she wants to be forgiven. So that, and she kind of showed me that that's a possibility of perpetrator's narrative. That so with victim's narrative, she couldn't go anywhere, but with perpetrator's narrative, she saw the new space where, you know, the space for wanting to be forgiven. That's what she said. And then all of a sudden her performance becomes very powerful. So that was something that we learned from this. One of the things that we learned from this process.
And what about the audience response, Myro, in both in well, how was it in Japan and how was it in
Japan? I
this part of
haven't
the
been
world?
able to show it yet.
Oh, have you not?
You know, I have been showing this work to many curators, but nobody wants to do it. That's Japan. That's very Japan. So I have to do it by myself. I have to find my own space to show it, and I have to do it like this year or next year. I'm trying to do it, but in Japan I haven't been able to show it publicly.
Sayuri, this is interesting. I mean, do you understand that, you know, from a Japanese point of view, you know, it seems consistent with your understanding of a Japanese approach to memories of war, particularly from this other side.
Yeah, I think I visited his exhibition in August in the Netherlands. I really like shocked and also like overwhelmed of the his work, and I really want people in Nagasaki, also in the world in Japan, should watch this Meiro-san's work, because I feel kind of I felt from the artwork was the sense of tracing the experience of those who lived through past events within my own mind and body somehow. So, and also and as a younger generation, so read his testimony one sentence at a time, I began to imagine the reason why my grandfather chose to stay silent. Yeah. So
yes.
kind of, yeah, I felt like that.
It's, I mean, the silence of your grandfather, which is, you know, is not unfamiliar, and I've, you know, on both sides, you know, my father never really talked about his experience of fighting in Burma, and your grandfather was, you know, similarly quiet, and then there is this silencing, you know, with respect to well, with respect to history and a sort of a national apprehension of history, you know, a silence as far as the Japanese art establishment is concerned, Myro. But Jill, I was thinking too, this is a work that reminds me a little bit of Jeremy Deller's work. You know, we're here because we're here, where these young people went out onto the streets of the UK, and they were dressed as soldiers, but they were dressed as First World War soldiers, but they didn't say anything, did they? They were quiet. I mean, they were quiet. I mean, they were to some extent living memorials of people who had died in war, and if anybody approached them, they would be given a card with details of that person who'd lost their lives, but they didn't say anything. And you know, there was a silence that was absolutely crucial for the success of that work. Perhaps one of the best things, one of the best experiences I had as somebody working with the Imperial War Museum. Perhaps you'd like to talk about that. And, you know, here we are. It's a work of art, a very powerful work of art that Myro's curated, and Jeremy Deller's piece, you know, similarly successful, I think. Can you talk a little bit more about art, and maybe art with, you know, in relation to this whole business of silence?
Yes, absolutely. Jeremy Deller's piece was just incredibly powerful, wasn't it? And actually, you know, on the theme of silence, I think, you know, part of the power of that artwork was the silence of the participants. You know, you didn't have to, they didn't have to speak to tell their story. It was just the visuals that sort of told the story. But the question of art overall, and sort of using art in that way, I mean, is something that we explored a lot at while I was at Imperial War Museums. I do think that art allows the audience a different way into the story, as I was saying earlier, and of course, an artist can explore a story and different perspectives of the story, and in particular, as Mary was describing, culturally sensitive parts of the story in a way that you can't just with a sort of straight sort of exhibition narrative. So another example of when we used art, I mean, you referenced the season that I did on Syria, which was back in 2016, when the war in Syria was, you know, really on all the front pages of the newspapers. And we had, we featured as part of our programming, we had an exhibition of photographs from the Russian photographer Sergei Pomeranov. And he had a particularly sort of documentary style of photography, which was just incredibly powerful. And that really told the story of what was going on in Syria from sort of a different perspective. We also did an art show called Age of Terror, Art Since 9/11, which was, you know, that sort of age of terror period that we all lived in, sort of, you know, after the World Trade Center in 2001. And again, rather than having a straight exhibition sort of narrative telling that story and what had happened since, we used artworks, so contemporary artworks, to sort of explore that, which I think was sort of, you know, much more powerful. Another one that I'd cite, actually, which is also Second World War, was portraits of Holocaust survivors. So these were contemporary portraits. We worked with the Royal Photographic Society, so they were a contemporary photography of Holocaust survivors who had settled within the UK. And you might initially think that that's sort of a, you know, a challenging and maybe somewhat depressing subject matter, but actually it was the most powerful and uplifting exhibition. It was fantastic because, of course, it celebrated the lives that Holocaust survivors had made for themselves and their families in the UK. So I do think, you know, the power of art is just incredible in telling these sorts of stories.
Myro, can you talk about that as well? I mean, your your motivation to some extent to use artistic medium or artistic media to convey these memories of war. I mean, it could just be the transcript of Kondo-san, you know, I mean, that you could just distribute the book and say, you know, listen to what this guy's got, you know, got to say about his personal experience. But you have decided, I mean, not just with this work, but, you know, through your practice generally, to use other ways of communicating.
Yes, yes, sure. Like as Jill said, like I totally agree with everything that you described, because artwork, it's like creating public monument on the street, but it's more in abstract form. It's more like in different form. So the challenge for artists is like the better the artwork is, the more chance that this part of the history will survive through time, even if it is a perpetrator's narrative. So it's a big challenge big responsibility, but also great possibility for artists. It's a great subject to work with because ethically it's very important for us and also for the future. And for example, like I always think about Yukiyuki Shingen. It's a documentary film by Kazuo Hara. It's called The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. It's made in 1987. Do you know this documentary film? It's a masterpiece of documentary film and deals with this part of Japanese, very cruel Japanese history, World War II. And since the film is so good, such a masterpiece, that this, since the aesthetic value of the work is so high, that the story that is told in the film is extremely cruel. It's about eating each other in a war, in a battle. It's very cruel, but this part of repressed story survives through the time. So that's one great thing about art. And also the possibility in art, I feel, I see, is that art can deal with contradiction or complexity, as Sayuri-san described, that it's very complex. It's not only about black and white, good and bad. It's always like this story and a story for the other side, and both are authentic and both are true. And that's how we are human beings. We are very complex. And art, the beauty or possibility of art is that art can when things are complex, it is very difficult to grasp and very difficult to share because it's this and this and very chaotic. But art is a way to kind of crystallize this complexity and making it into tangible form so that we can share the complexity without simplifying it. I think that's a possibility of art. So I very much been making my artwork with this kind of exploring this possibility.
Just going back to also to something you were saying, and the difference between art and a simple relating of a narrative or a story. I'm assuming that Kondo-san's book is available in Japan, and people can go to a bookshop and, oh well, there you are, you are. But it's your artistic response to that work that is that people are having difficulty with. It's not, it's not the book and not his story, but it's the way you have transformed it through your work that is having difficulty getting through when it comes to a Japanese art establishment.
Yes, I think so. For the institution, it's more about fear of getting a backlash on social media. It's not like official censorship or anything. It's more like self-censorship of the institution. And it's not so political even. It's more like institutions are afraid of being attacked from public through social media. Therefore they stop it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not difficult to imagine something similar going on. It's not just Japan that has a problem in this respect. I mean, America is having, considerable difficulty in this respect, or with respect to museums and the way they're telling their stories, Jill. So Jill, could you just say a little bit more about museums and how difficult it can be for them to communicate memories of war? And I mean, Myro's description of his frustration as far as Japan is concerned, but not so easy in America right now. And it's by no means the only case.
Yeah, absolutely. And, those cultural sensitivities are very important when you're planning your sort of overall sort of program in a museum, your exhibitions program, of course. But as I said at the beginning, sort of, one of the things that drew me to want to work in this area was to challenge that. So one of the last exhibitions that I did before I left IWM was an exhibition on sexual violence, which obviously we've touched on that subject as part of this this discussion. And one of the reasons that I felt that that was incredibly important story to tell is because it's largely an untold story. And one of the reasons for it being an untold story, well, there are two reasons really. One reason is, of course, cultural sensitivities. It's a taboo subject in most cultures, I would say. But also, of course, the lack of first-hand testimony, exactly because of that taboo. And so you don't have those voices of testimony in most cases around that subject matter. And this really is where museums can, you know, absolutely come in and, you know, contribute to storytelling in this area, because of course museums tell stories through objects. And so the object becomes the eyewitness. So even when you don't have someone who is telling the story about what happened personally to them, you through an object and through using other evidence can still tell that story. Never as powerful, of course, as first-hand testimony. That's always the way that you would want to go. But where you can't do that, you know, there are ways of doing this through objects. So the Syria exhibition that we mentioned earlier, we told that story through 6 objects. Deliberately kept it very, very simple, didn't want more than 6 objects because it was already a very, very complex story. And so then you've got 6 sort of starting points for telling the story. We did some research when I was at IWM amongst our audiences to sort of understand what stories they wanted us to tell and how they wanted to tell those stories. And it came up very clearly from that research that people want objects to help them, you know, explore these stories. So telling stories through objects is a really, really powerful way to reach these audiences. It allows sort of the, you know, the complexity that we've been talking about. It's the opposite of social media, black and white and echo chambers. You know, it really allows you to explore sort of in more depth. And museums such as Imperial War Museums also have what we might call a democratic collection, i.e. it's not the world's best, it's not the rarest, you know, it's not sort of some, you know, necessarily some sort of incredibly fabulous, expensive antiquity. Quite often the objects in museums such as IWM are very ordinary things that belong to ordinary people. It might be a cigarette case, it might be a shoe, it might be a book. And so these are things that are familiar to people. And so when people are going to a museum, they will see a familiar object. That's a way in. It's very accessible way in to then sort of telling this wider story about sometimes sort of sensitive and taboo objects that, you know, people have effectively been silent about. So I really think that there's an important role for museums in particular here in this space in terms of storytelling, and particularly on subjects that you know, have been unspoken in the past.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the reason I got into the whole art business was because of exactly as you describe. I mean, the way you can communicate non-verbally, you know, through particular presentation or contextualization or juxtaposition of objects or different kinds of gestures. I wish, Jill, that we had been working at the Imperial War Museum at the same time. We could have had some very interesting conversations then, I think.
Very good.
Yeah, and Sayuri, to finish our conversation, I strongly suspect that your interest in this subject is not finished, and I wondered, you know, how you see yourself perhaps working in this area in the future.
Yeah, so I think that we are now is a kind of border period. I mean, the number of hibakusha shrinking in the world, and their average age is 86.13 years old. And some of people I had hoped to interview this year have already passed away, unfortunately. So that makes me even more determined to record my grandfather's story while I still can. Yeah. And also, and also I want to see the different perspective through the prisoners of war experience. So as a journalist, I think my fundamental role in passing on memories of the war to serve as like a reminder, like to raise voices that are not heard and to speak on behalf those who cannot. So I try to want to find the people who wants to talk, and also I want to wait the people who can raise a voice and make a trust between them. And then, of course, I need to think about how we pass on to the future generation. But I believe there is still something our generation can do also. So I want to think this topic with you today. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's so important actually. I mean, the way you're communicating a certain urgency, and it's there, you know, in the conversation that we've had involving all three, that you know, that in this restless world, you know, it's very pertinent now to focus on this subject of memories of war. But the other point, Sayuri, that you're making, of course, is that we're running out of time. You know, when it comes to the first-hand witnesses of these experiences, particularly of the Second World War and what was visited upon Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, you know, we only have a few years left, and then it'll be the second and the third and all subsequent generations. But the first-hand accounts are invaluable.
Thank you all very much for participating, and thank you in particular to our 4 speakers, and hope to see you all at the Daiwa Foundation soon.